Careful is as careful does. And that expression has never been more true than today with the remarkable power of artificial intelligence. Sure, ChatGPT and Google's Bard and others are already revolutionizing how content is created, and the race is on to fine-tune models for companies. But wait, there may be some bad data in your systems. Better find that first. Find out more on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
I gotta say, folks, I have never seen the future come faster than it has been coming in the last few months. So here on our show, of course, we talk all about the information economy, new jobs, new roles, new technologies, new business models, new ways of doing things. And wow, we kind of hit the inflection point, I guess about 5-6 months ago. And really, you can peg it to ChatGPT as a large language model. It's not new. Large language models have been around for a while, for a couple of years at least. But this particular version came out mature enough and big enough and wild enough to really shock the business world. I can tell you that people are kind of freaked out. Even the folks at Google are nervous. And of course, they have their own large language model called Bard, which is different than ChatGPT in a number of different ways. But the bottom line is that this form of artificial intelligence, AI, is absolutely shaking the foundation of how we do business. It's not perfect, and it really is important to understand the limitations of these things and understand the use cases, when you use them, when not to use them. And there is all this talk of so-called hallucinations. Well, what is a hallucination? Well, for those who don't know yet, ChatGPT, Bard, these large language models, they are basically predictive engines for words, and they will deliver words based upon the prompt you give them. They've been trained on millions and even billions of points and tons, mountains of data. And so they can reflect back in prose all kinds of different concepts. You can use ChatGPT or Bard to write a business plan, or to write marketing emails, or to write articles or blogs or short stories or all kind of stuff. But it is generative in nature, which means it creates new stuff. And basically the way it works is it fuses together vectors of information based upon its model, its training, and also your prompts, what you give it. Well, very quickly in this new world, we started seeing people talk about embeddings and trying to figure out ways to get these engines to be more accurate in specific domains of content. So in banking or in healthcare or in retail or marketing or whatever, embeddings refer to actual real corporate data that you either embed into the model itself, which is kind of complicated, or most people are talking about embedding them in a vector database, which is then adjacent to the large language model. And what happens is when you give your prompt, the engine will reach into both areas. It'll reach into your vector database to see your trusted data, and then it'll reach over into its corpus of language and understanding to kind of fuse together some content that is reflective then of your corporate data. This is called training the models. And you do have to train these things for them to be very good at what you want them to be good at, but they are very good right out of the box at all kinds of stuff. But what's fun from my perspective is that when we start talking about pointing these algorithms at your corporate data, well, you have to be careful about that, because a lot of companies really don't know everything that they have in terms of data. And historically, it's been very difficult to figure that out, because what would you do? And just run some query and just run a report. Okay, here's our data. It's a very difficult thing to break down, to parse, and to demonstrate. And frankly, it's just hard to crawl across all those objects, all those documents in your SharePoint instance or wherever else you have information stored. So it's important to remember that for basically every organization of any significant size or age, you're going to have a ton of data in the form of spreadsheets, in the form of PDFs and Word documents and all kinds of different things. So you're going to have all this information that can be very useful, but there may be sensitive information, and there may be wrong information too. So this training is really important stuff, and we're going to talk to a company today that can help you figure out if you're at the starting line. Now, this is not all that they do, But when I was talking to them about their technology and their services, I thought to myself, hey, you guys have a really powerful story to tell in this whole large language model narrative that is unfolding right now. And so to that end, we've got Lewis Wynne-Jones on the line from ThinkData Works. And of course, we have our buddy Yves Mulkers in the wings. He'll be joining us in a second. But Lewis, tell us a bit about yourself and ThinkData Works and how you are able to help companies determine if they're ready for large language models and then kind of go down that road.
Thanks so much, Eric. And thanks for the sort of primer. I think that you hit the nail on the head. There's so much excitement right now. And a lot of that has been because of what ChatGPT has done in the past few months. My company is, as you sort of suggested, is more in the sort of data management space. And that's definitely a less sexy place than what you're sort of seeing when you plug a prompt into ChatGPT and see what comes out. But the reality is, if you scratch really hard at the surface, you start to realize that you do need to have well-structured data in order to get well-structured responses coming out the other end. I think that what we see with ChatGPT is the generalization of large language model and generative AI tech, which is why it's so exciting, right? The fact that there's something out there that I can go and I can plug a question into and get a pretty good response back. That's really exciting. But the reason it's exciting for me is because I haven't been working in AI for the past, 10 years trying to build these models. And the fact that my grandmother can go and do this is really sort of the exciting part of this. I think that if you want to start to have that tech embedded into the internal systems of most companies, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get you to that place. And the things that get you to that place are management of your data assets. I mean, you kind of mentioned it. Most people have data all over the place. They've got a better inventory of their office furniture than they do of their data sets. And there's a lot of things that are required to make good on the promise of AI and actually start to generate value at the back end of your business. And so that's really where our company sits. I'm the VP of product here, and we've been building a data platform for the past roughly 10 years. We were born out of the open data space, actually, which, for those of people who are listening who don't remember what that was all about, but it was governments that were sort of giving data into the public domain and saying this could be valuable. The problem with it was that it was all over the place. It was a mess. There was no standardization, and it was file formats from the 1970s. So what we did is we would sort of sit on top of all this data, standardize it, make it accessible to people, and that's when we really realized that the thing that was happening with open data globally was also happening within the enterprise itself. The data is all over the place. It's a mess. It's you don't know how to get the value out of it. And so the tool that we built to sort of standardize all this government data, we sort of turned towards business data and all of the tool and functionality that go along with that, which really does support it's sort of that data refinery in order to get the AI analysis coming out the other end of it. So I would say that it's a prerequisite to start to get the benefit of large language models or any other kind of AI modeling that you require.
Yeah, and I think your background and kind of where you all came from is perfectly suited for this challenge because you were out there trying to reconcile, classify, and organize this vast amount of data, unstructured data, all kind of different formats, very unwieldy. So that was your, kind of how you cut your teeth on that environment. And now you're able to do the same thing and help organizations, again, understand what they have, which for those who haven't tried, I promise is a very difficult and challenging task to undertake, but it's very important for lots of reasons. I mean, I kind of think that this is the sort of come to Jesus moment, if you will, for enterprises and all the data they've been sweeping under the rug for the last 30 years. It's like, we've known that we had to do something about it, but now you really, really do have to do something about it. And you guys can help with that process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it really depends who you're talking to because in certain boardrooms, people are saying, well, we want streamlined analytics. We want to make data-driven decisions. We want all this stuff. And they don't understand that in order to get there, you need to have your house in order. And it's a step that you can't actually skip, that sort of data operation step, the metadata management step, the good indexing, the good tagging, and the secure distribution throughout the enterprise is not a nice to have. It is a prerequisite. And what we're seeing across the enterprise is that people who have skipped that step and maybe set up very good data and analytics divisions who are trying to unleash the power of AI on the enterprise, what they're doing is they're generally sort of building one or two products a year. This is not fully automated, and this is not actually a system that is going to scale well. It's a system that under the hood, if you scratch it, like if you get underneath it, it's a lot of ad hoc work. And what everyone wants to do to really maximize the benefit of this stuff is to automate those processes. And the way to automate them is to have your data environment set up in a way that will facilitate sort of the pulling in of data, the pushing back, the sharing, the sort of collaboration, and the management of that data. Otherwise, what you're going to be doing is basically manually curating data sets and pushing them into Tableau, and that is not AI as far as I'm concerned.
That's I hear Yves laughing there. I'll bring you in to comment on that. I mean, I think Lewis just hit the nail on the head there. You really want to be strategic about this process, and it can be extremely valuable going through the inventory to understand where you've come up from and what's happening, right?
Yeah, what I see, I think back of my years of doing software development, and this is what we see now in data management, maturing it. Back in the days, you wrote a piece of code as such, and then some libraries came along. You started using those libraries to be more proficient and more productive in creating your applications and your software. And this is now happening with all the libraries. For example, if you take Python, that are available to access APIs, to access large language models. But still, like you say, Lewis, it's you take these things, you take one product, you build one product, but people don't think about the architecture to be capable of really scaling the products. And that's something where I see that is sometimes a misconnect between more technical people, especially in the IT department, compared to business people, where they see the magic shining object and they think, well, it's like you say in Tableau, bam, we've got our dashboard. Yeah, next time something changes, how fast are you gonna change the dashboard? How much effort will it take you? Do you understand where your data come from? And that is what, when we talk about architecture, that you need to put these really solid foundations in place to be able to manage it. And that's very oftentimes forgotten. So I'm quite happy that I've seen it through my career as well. These are the things we've been building over the time, and now all of a sudden it gets attention, it gets a name. Like, for example, if you talk about observability, well, we need to know where the data comes from. Yes, we've been interrogating the metadata over time into our systems to understand how it looks like, to automate it, to deploy it in a continuous way. Look at software development as well, where now we have continuous integration and continuous development, where this was not possible 20, 30 years ago. And I see that happening now with especially with the large language models and all the AI tools, that we are definitely looking at that. So once we've get this really into a continuous development mode, we're off the hook. I think it's going to be even more amazing, and the speed is going to increase even more than we saw over the last few months with the large language models.
Yeah, and I'll bring Lewis back in to comment on something in particular. You mentioned architecture, and Lewis, that's really important, right? What Yves is talking about here is building an information foundation that will allow you to then build apps more quickly, as opposed to just building one-off bespoke apps, which may solve a business problem for now, but will not scale very well and won't be optimal in terms of allowing you to do other apps that use the same data. For example, we're talking about data products here, right? And so if you build the foundation well, then the individual products can be spun up pretty quickly and efficiently. Whereas if you don't, if it's all bespoke and spaghetti wires going in between them, again, it may solve a particular problem, but it's not going to last for too long, and it will amount to technical debt before long, right?
Yeah, and I mean the thing is this isn't theory. This is practice. We've seen this happen before. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people said, "Oh, if you dump all your data into a data lake, magic stuff is going to come out of it." Well, what happened there? We got a bunch of really, really messy data environments, and people still struggling with this problem. And then people said, "Okay, well, the cloud will be the solution to all these problems." Well, okay, people started to centralize to the cloud, and now they're going back to having a more sort of on-prem and hybrid environment. People are looking for the magic bullet, the thing that's going to sit on top of an unstructured environment and magically pull insights out. That's not what's going to happen, and AI can never get there because it needs to be trained in a well-architected environment, in a good sort of well-balanced place where data flows evenly. And that, I'm not saying that the previous technologies that have come out from cloud to data lakes have been mistakes. They haven't. They've been extremely useful and they've taken us sort of forward. But I think now what we're looking at is you don't want to have to centralize everything into one place for a bunch of reasons, but you also can't have everything existing in random regions everywhere. So really what we're seeing, and this is just from an architecture perspective, is a new sort of reliance and focus on data virtualization. So you can actually connect the data wherever it is, and you are centralizing access without actually centralizing assets themselves. And that's the sort of thing that you can do to really start to create this central observation platform for the data. And that's going to be the key to unlock management and distribution within the enterprise. And then, of course, yes, all the downstream benefits of connecting to your analytical tools. And if you need to, your models that you're going to be building at the back end. But without it, you're just sort of trying to build on pretty murky, swampy ground.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point where you're democratizing access through a governed zone, if you will. Because, and we've talked about this for years now on this show and other shows too, that something like data governance cannot happen if you have 18 to 200 entry points where you're only managing 5 to 7 of them. Well, then you don't have governance. Now, historically, getting to that point was extremely difficult because the technology really wasn't up to snuff. If you tried to go through that one choke point, things just wouldn't work fast enough. But I think we have seen the capability to expand out, to scale out dynamically and be able to handle those things real quick. I think, Lewis, we are at the beginning of another era because we now can pull that off efficiently and effectively, whereas 5-10 years ago it wasn't really that possible. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Governance matured faster than the technology, and so the principles of governance were saying, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. And so people were writing extremely robust data privacy programs, but they couldn't actually implement them with the tech that existed. Now that tech does exist, and I think that the kind of egalitarian approach to distribution within the enterprise and good governance are possible at the same time. So you can get increased access and increased governance at the same time, which before it was, I think, one or the other.
Your host, Eric Kavanaugh, here with Yves Mulkers and Lewis Wynne-Jones. We'll be talking about the power of AI and are you ready for it in your organization? I've been joking that my router may not be ready for the power of AI because it keeps crapping out on me. That's not very good. I have to call Armstrong Cable after this show and read them the riot act. But in the meantime, let's get back to our guests. And we were just talking about how the data management side really is so crucial. And I'll throw this over to you first. Lewis, data management has always been important. Data quality, understanding your processes, your workflows, all that stuff, what you have, where it came from, lineage, etc. And it's even more important now in the age of AI because these engines are very powerful and they will take whatever you give them and create something from that. And if what you're giving them is bad data, you're going to get very bad results, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that talking about the results, the thing that's kind of happening right now is that the people who are in charge of data management historically have been kind of the IT side of the organization, whereas the people who are in charge of the results, the data products and those things, were more business. And what's happened over the past 10 years, 15 years, is those two sides of the business have grown further and further apart. What we need to do, both like just sort of culturally, but also through infrastructure, is to bring those two sides of the business back together again, right? You need to have data management intimately tied to data productization and building AI and things like that. Because alternatively, what you have, if you don't do that, is the business side of the organization talking about AI and all of its potential to transform business, and the IT side of the organization stuck in sort of data governance land. And you need to start bringing those two things together to sort of create a cohesive umbrella of data and analytics together, which are governed by single tools that are applicable to business users and IT users in equal measure. And I think that's something that ChatGPT has actually done really, really well, is made this something that can be used by anyone.
Yeah, and let me just kind of chime in here and say that there are lots of different values that you can get from data virtualization, one of which is just knowing which data is most important. I'll throw it over to Lewis first, but if you have a good data virtualization solution, you're going to be seeing in very clear fashion what data is being used, what data is important. That can help you then architect the rest of your data foundation, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, a data virtualization is one of those things that I think is close to that silver bullet that people have been looking for, because what it allows you to do is, instead of getting tied up into this ETL land where you're constantly having to move things from here and there, you're just projecting it from where it lives into a centralized place, and creating that sort of possibility for someone who maybe doesn't have access to your SQL server to go see the data that's in it without it moving, without it breaking any of your governance rules. And that's why virtualization is a tool within a sort of larger data management framework that's really, really powerful to just provide that democratic access piece. Now, of course, you want some layers of control on top of that about how you actually distribute the data, but just having the ability to project or create a lens through to the data from where it resides into another location that is more user accessible is incredibly powerful technology. And then the next piece of that, of course, is once you've got access to that piece of data, that virtualized data, being able to then connect it to your downstream analytics from that same centralized place, right? Because if you can't finish off that storyline, then you've just sort of checked the book out from the library, but you can't open it, right? It's not useful for you. So you need to have that end-to-end integrated setup. And Yves earlier was talking about the architecture needs to be right there. And the problem is, if you try to do this with 7 different discrete pieces of functionality, they all need to play nice with each other, right? And what our approach has always been is that you need to be able to do all of these things from a single system that can virtualize the data, make it discoverable, and then push it down where it needs to go. If you try to break that apart too far, you're going to get in the weeds again.
Yeah, well, and there is this question of scale. I think, Yves, that's what's really shaking a lot of businesses right now, is that the scale of data that's available that needs to be processed to get some signal for AI is so much larger than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And old systems are just going to break. They're just not going to be able to suffice. And so we're in this sort of transformative period of time now where organizations have to be very strategic and figure out, what is my stepping stone to the next generation of technologies? And I think that's where data virtualization is extremely compelling, because again, you use it as this pathway, a bridge to get to the next way of doing things that still is connected to your existing environment, because you know, rip and replace is always very, very difficult. So difficult that it almost never happens. Right? I mean, we've joked before about sunsetting applications and other fantasies, right, or other fairy tales. So it's difficult to do. So that data virtualization is a really powerful mechanism to solve these problems and open the door to the next generation of how to do things. What do you think, Yves?
Yeah, we've been discussing about that, and what I see in a virtualization layer, and which is not so understandable for the most of the people, is it's simplified, or it's abstraction of the integration behind the scenes as such. If you, back in the days, they've been building point-to-point systems, so you had to integrate each system with each and every other system within the organization. That takes a lot of time. If something changes on one end, you need to change all the interacting systems. With virtualization, this is kind of glue what you put on top of that. If you think about object-oriented programming, you had your classes and it was a kind of abstraction layer, what you had through which you were talking to the other systems. Compare it to an API in such a way. This is where integration solves, where virtualization solves a part of the integration problem as such. But at this other end as well, allows you to scale your systems because it's composable. You can change your database behind the scenes, or depending on which type of query you want to run, is it more analytical or more operational wise, you can talk to different systems. But it looks like one and the same system if you're a user using the virtualization layer. And that helps into going much faster in building applications and systems on top of a virtualization layer. So for the future as well, you're kind of safe because you developed everything on the simplification layer. And if you need a more performant system, you simply, let's call it still simply, plug it in the other system that is more performant, more scalable as such. If we now see at the cloud, if you need the cloud, you can switch it off to the cloud and make it more scalable and move back to on-prem. So that will simplify your IT landscape in such a way. But my feeling is that we're still pretty far off on the virtualization level. A lot of organizations are still very reluctant towards virtualization because they had back experiences in the day where it was not performant. It was pretty expensive. But if you see now the virtualization landscape together with some semantic layers, this is the time to really look into that and consider that if you're building modern data applications.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of terms get thrown around like data lakehouse and data lake and data warehouse. And of course, a very popular term has been data fabric over the last number of years. And when I think about the functionality that a data fabric should have, well, what does it boil down to? It boils down to access, governance. It boils down to automation, where automation makes sense. And I think that's the ultimate data fabric that has the automation built into it to know when things are happening and to go and grab data sort of before it's needed or before it's going to be needed, that kind of thing. It seems to me that virtualization, if it gets robust enough, can fulfill that role of a data fabric. But I don't know, what do you think, Lewis? Am I splitting hairs or conflating things?
No, I mean, I think that that's a fair point. I think that we're still going to see where we land with the whole data fabric, data lakehouse, the new nomenclature bit. I'd put my money right now on data fabric being the one that sort of emerges triumphant because I think it's very realistic in terms of what is possible. Access, discovery, governance, observability are all made possible by having data virtualization and a data catalog blended together. You throw in some data ops and some health monitoring there, and you've got a pretty slick end-to-end platform. And then the final key, I think, is that actually at the end of the day, being able to access that underlying data becomes really, really critical. And this is, Yves mentioned, some people have been bitten before with sort of virtualization tools and things like that. I think that was based on a sort of system where just cataloging the data was enough. But at the end of the day, you still need to be able to provide access to that data and need to push it down to where it needs to go in order to provide benefit to the organization. And these are the types of things that we've learned over the past decade that now we're getting right. And yeah, I think that Fabric is really the solution to that. I think the next step is sort of also getting a solution that enables you to distribute your data more holistically throughout the enterprise and in a secure way to really enable that democratization among business and technical units.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Eve, maybe I'll throw it over to you for commentary. Again, these are fairly loose terms, but data fabric, I think, does boil down to the access layer that you want your apps to connect to, because at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about applications that are going to connect to the data that they need to get something done. So instead of the old-fashioned process of just persisting data in MongoDB or MySQL or whatever, that's a very linear, sort of limited approach. And instead, you want this richer environment that any number of apps can tap into and quickly get what they want and get more than they would have gotten from just a single connection to a single database, right, Eve?
Yeah, the most important part is here that the centralized or the central available governance, what you can tie to your data products in such a way, and that you either consume it through an application, operational application, an API, or you just do an export. You always have that same type of approach on who can access which data. Before, it was only within the organization, and we see more and more organizations exchanging it with external organizations. So there is the important part, that you have an easy way of onboarding your external parties and decide who can see what type of data in an easy way, that you can govern that data. Where is it going to? Who is using it for what? So you stay compliant and know where your data is going there. Especially in marketing, you want to know who are your consumers and who is using your data. Especially in Europe, we're pretty strict on understanding where that data is being used for privacy reasons. And I think in that direction, Data Fabric is definitely a very nice architecture to support governance in a pretty easy way.